when we're ready, we can have our ears opened, our hearts opened, and our minds open to be ready to listen to our beautiful, honorable, venerable Ajahn Akaliko. Mindfully and heartfully, let us welcome him.
Akaliko Bhikkhu is an Australian monk in the Theravada's forest traditions. Bhante Akaliko first encountered Buddhism as a teenager and spent over 20 years of practicing in different traditions before taking full ordination with Ajahn Brahm as his preceptor at Bodhayana monasteries in 2016. He currently resides with his long-term teacher, Bhante Sujato, at Lokanta Vihara, the monastery at the end of the world in Sydney, Australia. Bhante Akaliko is the founders of Rainbody, LGBTQIA, Buddhism communities and Buddhist chaplain at Western Sydney University. He also on the board of directors of Buddhist Councils of New South Wales.
Thank you so much to my friends at the Nantien 2030 campaign for inviting me to give this talk today. We already had 2 acknowledgements of country, so I'll just let you know that I'm here on Barramadagal land in Parramatta, and this is the land of the Darug Nation. So I, as you have already done, also add my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. And so today I've been invited to talk about Buddhism and the symbiocene. So fortunately, I know a little bit about one of those topics, and that's Buddhism. I don't know a lot about the symbiocene, but Tom very kindly shared a whole heap of articles with me. Some of them were quite dense, thanks Tom. And I looked through these articles, and the ideas that kept on coming back to me was that it's possible for us to live in harmony with our planet. And it's a nice idea. I think it was something we did for a long time, right? And something went wrong somewhere along the way. And now I look outside and look at all the stuff littering the streets here in Harris Park. And I think, what is the cause of this mess that we find ourselves in? And so today I'm going to be exploring some of the ideas that come from Buddhism that we can learn from and apply to living in a harmonious way with our environment. And to do that, I'm not going to be speaking so much about the symbiocene or what it might mean. I'm going to be just giving some basic insights into the historical Buddha, his practices, his suggestions, and then telling some personal stories and sharing some images with you about how I believe Buddhism helps us to live in harmony with our environment. And so many of you will know that there's this person who is named Gautama the Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha, who was around in ancient India over 2,500 years ago. So this was the beginning of the Iron Age. It was actually a striking change from the preceding ages where new technologies were being rapidly developed. There was a large increase in urbanization during this period. And of course, there was an uptick in the standard of life, the quality of life that people could enjoy. But there was also problems. People were becoming rich whilst others were still poor. There was new technologies like metallurgy developing, but this also created the need for mining and also waste. There was a plethora of objects that could be made and bought. And so this was, I suppose, the beginning of environmental problems that was happening in the Ganges plain 2,500 years ago. So the reason I say that is because previously, people were living in very simple, small villages. The impact that they had on their local environment would have been immediately obvious. And they had to live in harmony with nature. They had to preserve the resources that they had. If they didn't, it would quickly tip out of balance and their life would be affected. However, something happens when you move into cities. This growth, this urbanization means that things that happen beyond the city walls start to become very distant. Just as today, the things that we rely on for our everyday goods and survival are very far away from us, and we're very disconnected from the means of production and the things that go into all of the delights we have in the world. But the Buddha was an ascetic. Before he became the Buddha, he was of the princely caste. The great story of the Buddha is that he had everything he wanted. He lived a rich life full of sensuality, dancing girls, musicians, elegant houses, beautiful gardens, all the things he could possibly want in the world. But he saw through these sensory delights and saw that they didn't bring the kind of happiness he was looking for. And so many of you will know the story of the Buddha leaving the palace and going out into the world and seeing these four sights of old age, sickness, death, and an ascetic, a spiritual practitioner, which spurred him to renounce his princely life and to undertake spiritual training. And so in Buddhism, we take the Buddha as our greatest teacher and friend. He taught wisdom to us out of compassion. And he gave us an insight into what it means to live a spiritual life and what things are important for us to develop a mind of happiness and wisdom. And so when you think about the Buddha, maybe you think about that wonderful image of him sitting underneath the Bodhi tree, meditating on the night of his enlightenment, meditating under the canopy of this beautiful large tree that sheltered him. All of the Buddha's major life activities occurred in the open air, in nature. He was born under a sal tree. He attained enlightenment under the Bodhi tree, and he died, passed into parinibbana in the open air. Buddha was intimately connected with nature. So many of his teachings use nature's similes and metaphors to help us understand our spiritual life and the path that he outlined. So for a monk like me, I look to the Buddha for guidance about how I should live, just as many Buddhists look to the Buddha for guidance about how they should live too. And at our time of ordination, when monks and nuns take the ordination and start wearing our robes, we're told that we as monks and nuns now are practicing a life of renunciation. We move from the householder's life to the life of a renunciant. We voluntarily give things up. We give up the household life, we take up the holy life. We give up delighting in sensual pleasures, possessions, wealth, and we delight instead in contentment, frugality, simplicity. And so when we ordain, we're told that we should rely upon what's called the four requisites. These are the four basic needs that we have as Buddhist monastics. The first is accommodation, that we should have simple accommodation, that we should actually be content at the foot of a tree. This is accommodation enough. So this is a pretty rustic and simple accommodation, right? It doesn't sound very comfortable. But this is the basic accommodation that we could look for. And then there's food, that we should rely upon alms food. That's food that's offered on the streets or in the village. We're not allowed to cook. We don't have money. So the way that we practice our right livelihood is to walk down the street with our alms bowl and collect any food that's left over or that's offered to us. And so this is a very simple way to live, just reliant upon others' generosity and kindness and just accepting whatever food is coming along. The next thing that we're instructed to rely upon is our robes, our outfits, our clothing. We're supposed to be content with simple rags made into robes, rags that are just scattered around that we might find in the village, on the street, or even in the charnel grounds, the cemeteries of the day. These are the kinds of clothes that monks and nuns should be content with. And then the last one is medicine. We're supposed to be content with very simple medicine. So wait till you hear what it is. Some of you might already know, but monks and nuns are supposed to be content with fermented urine for medicine. So I don't know about you, but I'll probably just take a Panadol. So these are the 4 basic, really basic requirements for human life and the holy life. And it sounds so simple. And it sounds like, wow, that's what we should, maybe we should all just do this. We should all just renounce the world, live at the bottom of a tree, and just wear rags for clothes. What do you think? No? No. And you see, in a way, that's the problem, that we're not content. We're not easily satisfied. We're not very frugal. We have desires. And even for monks and nuns, this kind of extremely ascetic life is just simply not possible or practical. And so take, for example, living in the open air or living under a tree or living in a cave. I mean, today's a pretty cold day in Sydney and I've got several layers on. I can't imagine sleeping outside. And there are so many homeless people who do, and their life is really tough. So I wanted to tease out this problem of our idealism and the kind of like the nobleness of asceticism and the ideal situations that we wish that we could strive for, especially as people who are interested in the environment and interested in creating change. It's difficult. You know, we have these ideal situations that we would like to see in the world, but getting there is difficult. And it's not difficult because people are reluctant to give things up. It's difficult because desire gets in the way. And so something like accommodation becomes an issue. So I'm going to quickly go through these 4 requisites, just problematize them a little bit, just get you to think about them in different ways. I'm going to share my screen a little bit. So let me know, just with a thumbs up, maybe if you can see what's on my screen. Yes, okay, good. Sorry, I just minimized the window so I couldn't see a thumbs up. Okay, so this isn't at the foot of a tree, but this is a hut in the forest that I stayed in just a few weeks ago, actually. This is a very simple hut down at Santi Monastery, a monastery for nuns in Bundanoon, where it's quite cold and quite beautiful. And it's a lovely, lovely spot. There's a cliff just across from the hut there and a valley in between, and the cockatoos fly past the window of the hut. There's a stream nearby. I'll show you in a sec. So these are what's called a little monk's hut or a kuti. This is it. It's got nice windows. Actually, these windows are double glazed, which really makes a difference. There is a simple fireplace inside, plenty of firewood around. This is the interior. That's the bed. Just pull the bed down and that's it, basically. That's the stream that's nearby. And this is another little meditation hut just up on the top of the hill. So you see, this is so simple and so beautiful, right? It's really so lovely to be able to stay in the forest, to be connected with nature, to feel like you're in this pristine environment, to experience the fresh air and to enjoy the amazing sight of seeing the stars at night. Just so many stars, and they knock your eyes out. And it's so beautiful. You feel so small and so insignificant. And to think that this vision of the heavens with so many stars is what humans have seen for countless generations going back in time. And that today, with pollution and light pollution, these stars have faded in our cities, almost into oblivion. And I get so embarrassed sometimes when I think, I'm walking at night in the city and I think I see the moon, but it's actually a street lamp. We're so disconnected from the things that we used to be connected to as humans. But I remember thinking I was living a pretty pristine life in the forest and not being spiritually smug or anything, but thinking I was living well. And I think probably compared to many people, it is good to live in a forest like that. Obviously it's not possible for the entire population of the world, right? But actually, one thing that I realized after living in forest monasteries for some time is the sad fact that every action of mine has an impact on the environment. That the building of that hut required metal and trees, that sustaining the temperature inside the hut during the winter months requires using some fuel for the fire and putting smoke out into the environment. I go to some forest monasteries that are really remote, and there's always this giant junk pile hidden away somewhere where all the stuff that couldn't be put in the bin is left. And just recently I visited a monastery somewhere up north, and I was really sad to see this gigantic pile of junk, all plastic and stuff that they, because they didn't have any recycling in the area that they lived in, it was just piling up. And so I guess when I say I want to problematize this a little, I want us to unpick this illusion of pristine forest life, and that it's easy to think of this as some sort of less environmentally destructive lifestyle. It's still a lifestyle, even though it is simpler, and even though it is far less destructive than the life I live here, perhaps in the city, or the life of Hollywood stars or whatever. There's always going to be an impact on the environment. And I remember meditating in the forest and being really, really sad to understand that. It really broke my heart, actually, because all around me are these beings who are living in such harmony with nature. Sure, the wombats do gigantic poos all over the place. And sure, if you leave your washing out, you're bound to get a little bit of bird poo on it too. Of course, the ants and the termites make a bit of mess. But actually, I realized that humans are the only animals that leave such a disgusting trace upon our environment. And it made me really sad, because even though I was trying to live as simply as possible, I saw that I still had an impact, that the things around the hut that I was doing that caused an impact, that whenever I washed my clothes, there was detergents involved, that the toilets, the compost toilets, they still had to be cleared out and emptied, and the sewage system still needed, it's like a septic sewage system, still got pumped out into the nature. And from time to time, you walk around and you see something that had been perhaps blown away by the wind or carelessly left behind. And in that place, because the environment does seem so pristine, those things really stand out in nature. And I remember finding a plastic bottle that probably had been left there for such a long time, way off in the bush. And I just had this feeling of immense sadness. This bottle could be 10, 15, maybe 20 years old, was still there, and it just wasn't going to go away. And so this kind of sad realization is something that greatly affects me, because like many of you, the destruction of our environment is something that troubles you on a very deep level. And we wonder, can it be a different way? Could it have been different? Could we have gone down a different path? And when I see these forest monasteries, they're a long way from the time of the Buddha. But even at the time of the Buddha, monasteries started to develop. A lot of monks started to live together. The monk rules are full of stories about how to manage the latrines, how to build places, how to protect wildlife and things like that. So these rules were being formulated to help guide a community that was rapidly developing. And already there was a shift from just being content to live under a tree to needing to have monasteries with 2, 3, maybe 4 stories for monks and nuns to live together. And so then I was visiting Bodhinyana Monastery last week, which is over in Perth. And I went over for a retreat with some of my teachers. I used to live there. It was a good chance to catch up with the gang. And they showed me some of the new kutis, the new huts that had been built in what used to be a really gorgeous area on top of a hill. And there had been quite a bit of clearing that had to be done. And there's these really over-engineered huts that had been built. And they had been over-engineered in order to be compliant with the local fire regulations, which were really, really strict in WA. And so you have these metal buildings with, metal roofs and brick buildings, and land has to be cleared around them. More land had to be cleared to build an emergency fire bunker, and also to create a leach drain for the septic system. And all of these things are, of course, imposed by local councils. And you want to be obedient to the local councils, otherwise you can get in a lot of trouble. And this is the kind of thing that happens in the world, right? We have these standards and we have these requirements, and the idea of a simple hut in a forest becomes impossible. And so there's these kind of layers of acceptance and resentment and layers of complexity involved in being a forest monk like me. You know, they had to have concrete roads, they had to have a bridge built that was able to carry a fire truck. So these are the realities of our world. And just next to this beautiful, just next to this concrete bridge, there used to be, and there still is actually, a little wooden footbridge that just went over this little creek. So simple, so easy, and yet so impossible. And that's how it is. And it's hard to accept that that's what it means to have a forest monastery in the 21st century, 22nd century, whatever we're up to. And it's the same for all of those other requisites that I have as a monk. So that's the accommodation side. You know, things are a bit more fancy, a bit more complicated than being under a tree. Something like our alms food. So I go down the street here in Harris Park with my alms bowl, and people put food into my bowl. So originally, of course, it was just meant to be leftovers, just the stuff that you had spare lying around, and you offer it to the monks and nuns. We're supposed to be content with that. But people are so respectful and they value the work that monks do, so they make delicious, lovely food and they put it into our bowls. And when we first began, we said here at the monastery that we didn't want to have plastic containers. We wanted people just to put food directly into our bowl. But then we ended up getting so much food, it became really difficult. And people started putting plastic containers, takeaway containers, into our bowl. And Bhante Sujado and I, who are both like really sincere, committed environmentalists, we're like so upset by this development. You know, this is our secret shame. We have these plastic containers given to us, and it's unavoidable. We just couldn't do it in another way. So we have some people who are really regular supporters, and they give us containers that that belong to them that we give back. But we never know sometimes if we'll see people again. We've tried to have a few systems set up where we try to recycle and reuse those containers. And in the end, it became too difficult and too complicated. And then COVID came along and people didn't want them. And all of these difficult complications, right? So hard to be simple. So hard to live up to those standards that we ask of ourselves. And I wish I could figure out a different way, but it just hasn't happened in the time that I've been here. And so that's been difficult. And then people give us such lovely food as well. You know, sometimes at some monasteries, you'll see people offering things like lobster. And you think, wow, we're supposed to be simple monks, you know, how did this happen that we end up like this? We're supposed to be eating leftovers, and instead people are coming along offering these gourmet foods. It's difficult, right? To be simple, difficult to live in a simple way. And then let's see, the other thing is robes. So robes, which were meant to be rags, pulled from corpses and stitched together in a patchwork pattern. So that's what we're supposed to be content with. But now, of course, you know, we get these robes given to us already fully made from lovely cotton, and there's not a patch on them when we get them. However, over time, you may have seen me, some of my friends here, we in the forest tradition are encouraged to repair our robes. So these are the only clothes I have, by the way, apart from like a few shirts and jumpers. And so we take care of these clothes, we take care of our robes. We try to keep them for as long as we can. And so we repair them and we stitch and patch. And eventually the material will become so thin that it's time for a new one. But it can take 2 or 3 years. And so we try to be good. But at the time of the Buddha, the monks started to be given really nice quality robes as well. So even 2,500 years ago, things had started to change, and the monks were given really nice robes. So the Buddha would encourage them to repair and keep them for as long as possible, to not be greedy, We have rules about storing up robe cloth. We're not allowed to do it. We have to be content with what we've got. And we have all sorts of rules about collecting it and using it. But when the Buddha was asked what people should do with their old robes, he said, well, we should patch them and keep them for as long as possible, which is great, right? He wasn't saying, oh, just go out and get new robes whenever. He said, use them, keep them, patch them, make good use of them for as long as you can. And then if they're no longer good, you can use them for sheets, or you can use them for a sitting cloth, or you can use them for curtains, or if they're no good for that, then you can turn them into rags to wash your feet with. And so this is an amazing spiritual teaching about contentment and to recycle, reuse, and hopefully reduce. And so what I do here at the monastery at the end of the world is I patch my robe, and so we have scrap materials. And then once they're no longer usable as a robe, I turn them into whatever else we need. So there's a few cushions here. I'm just doing show and tell. This used to be my robe, and it's all mostly hand sewn. And it makes me feel really good to see that, and often I'll look at people and they have so many outfits, and if it gets a hole in it, so often people these days will just throw it straight in the bin, which is such a sad thing, really. Because we've lost the art of repair, and we've lost this idea of making use, being thrifty with our clothes. But there's another reason. It's because we get bored with our fashion, and we want to look good. We get bored with that idea of ourself, and we want a new me to be presented to the world. So this was something that I had to come to terms with as a person before I became a monk, that my fashion choices were actually incredibly environmentally destructive. And I'm sure you all know that the fashion industry is one of the worst polluters, and caring for our clothes is also incredibly polluting, especially washing our clothes excessively and using hot water, detergents, or using dryers. And again, I'm really lucky here. We got a long washing line, just like literally a cable, put on to our balcony. But many places in Australia have strata laws that prevent people from being able to hang their clothes on balconies. And it's just so insane, because of course it means that they have to try to put it on one of those small clothes horses and dry it out inside, or they just use the clothes dryer, which is incredibly bad for the environment. And one of the things I love seeing when I go to monasteries is all the robes being hung out to dry in the sun. And we only wash our robes maybe every 2 weeks or a month. I hope that's okay, everyone. Luckily, we're on Zoom. You're a long way from me. And it's good, to be careful about that sort of thing. And I notice, because I hand wash my robes, we don't have a washing machine here. I notice how just the act of washing can damage the cloth, and so we have to be really careful. But that's how we try to be content, by repairing and reusing as much as possible. And then that last requisite of medicine, of course, these days, I think it's fairly safe to say most nuns and monks are not relying upon fermented urine for medicine. We use other things like vitamin C or Panadol or whatever's needed. And the Buddha allowed for this, of course. But what I wanted to kind of outline in talking about these things is the difficulty of keeping it simple. And I imagine it's the same for all of you. It's not actually easy, is it? When we moved in here, we really can't, just looking around, we really consciously tried to keep it simple as much as possible. You know, it's really easy to fill up a space. So over time, in the 3.5 years that we've been here, we've acquired quite a few things, actually. This bookcase here came recently. Our friend Aya Yeshe insisted that we had a Buddha statue. People have given us a few things for the shrine. There's quite a few pot plants. It's my fault. And there's a few decorations. We've kept it pretty simple, but actually it's difficult. And this is what happens when you stay in a place for some time. You accumulate stuff, right? Keeping it simple is the challenge. Yeah. Working on simplification is an option, but it's not enough. I'll talk more about that in a second. But one of the things that we did consciously decide when we moved in here was that we would refuse anything that was new. We would only accept things that were secondhand or that we found on the street. And so we found quite a lot of stuff on the street. This shrine here that you see, there's a table underneath that. There's a recycled robe on the top of it with a few drawing pins in it to keep it safe. This was something we found on the street and was carried back to the Vihara on Bhante Sujado's head. And so we tried as hard as we could to really think about making sure that we weren't using new materials. Even in the kitchen, everything secondhand. The only thing really is the mattresses and the pillows for our beds. And it was difficult because people always want to buy you new things. People always want to offer more and more stuff. And so we had to have this policy of like saying no. It's hard to say no to people who are wanting to be generous. But the problem is stuff coming in. It's quite easy to get rid of stuff. You just take it outside, as I'll show you in a little bit, and dump it on the street. That's what seems to happen, right? It's easy to get rid of stuff. It's hard to stop stuff coming in. And even when Tom said before, you know, simplify, that stuff goes somewhere. And as Jan said at the beginning of this talk, perhaps before the recording started, she was saying she had some magazines that she was holding on to, that she was desperate to give away to someone who wanted them, and how difficult it was to find someone to take them. And I know so many stories of people dealing with deceased estates or wanting to get rid of things that they no longer need, and they just can't get rid of it. And as we know, waste is such a problem in our society, and all of the charity shops don't want your ugly old couch. They don't want your 3-year-old TV even. You know, charities now are the pickiest, choosing beggars of them all. And so I remember thinking in my youthful naivety that the stuff that went out for council collections were carefully taken away and cared for. And then the horror one day of walking down the street when I was much younger and seeing all those lovely things that people had put out, what I saw lovely. You know, I went to art school, so obviously I have a different view on these things. All these things that were put out on the street that were just loaded into a truck, a compactor truck, and I watched this beautiful couch just get eaten up, crushed between the jaws of this compactor truck. And that really affected me. You know, the idea that even quite good quality stuff left on the street was not desirable enough to reuse or repair, and that it was just going straight to landfill. And that I am complicit in that my life is part of the problem, and I live as simply as I can. And it's a perceptual thing. like when I'm at the monastery in Bandanoon or any other forest monastery, you have this illusion that you're living in harmony with nature. But the reality is that that lifestyle depends upon so much more just out of your vision. And I remember reading a definition of trash, what is rubbish, and it's simply matter that is out of place. And I'd see someone like my father who would walk down the street and tut that people had been litter bugs. But I know that they were the kind of well-meaning citizens who would every few years get a new couch or redo the kitchen or whatever and put everything out on the street, thinking that they had been good citizens for doing this because they were putting the garbage in the right place. It wasn't out of place, it was in the right place. Whereas the stuff on the street, they regarded as, the wrong place, the rubbish that you see lying in the gutters and things like that, that's the wrong place. They thought that by putting things out for the council collection, that they were doing the right thing, putting that stuff to the right place. But actually, it just goes to landfill and it just goes to this pile that we're all accumulating. And it's just that we can't see it. We don't see the landfill. We don't see the open cut mines that we rely upon for metals that we see in our heaters or that we have in our phones. We don't see it. We don't see how out of whack we are with our environment. And so what I want to do with you now is kind of share a little bit about how I came to terms with this fact. And it was my dear friend and teacher, Bhante Sujato, who once pointed on one of our walks, pointed out a packet of chips or something that had been left somewhere, blown about by the wind and was slowly fading in a gutter somewhere. And he said, that's nature now. That's part of nature now. And I was so uncomfortable with this remark. I was really challenged by it. And it really upset me that he could say that, because he's an environmentalist too, and he cares about nature. And if that's nature, then what are we doing? Has he given up? And he was saying that's what it is now. That's part of our nature now. And we have to accept it. That stuff is a part of our experience. And like I say, it really challenged me, and spent a lot of time kind of thinking about it. Because what we were seeing is something that's actually there. And even if we get rid of it, it's still there, right? We can't hide it. It's just that we think that if it's in a different place, it's better. And maybe it is. I mean, certainly with things like batteries and stuff, you want to keep them in the right place. But this idea that this is actually part of our experience, and that version of a pristine environment that perhaps we all here cling to, it just doesn't exist anymore. And that's the reality. And it's a hard truth and it hurts. But that's what it looks like now. That's our planet at this time. And I hope it won't always be that way. But this is what it means to be us right now. And so just to finish up, I want to share with you some images that I took as part of my grieving process, as part of coming to terms with this grim reality, and to remind myself about my own actions and how they impact, and encourage other people to think about their actions. So I still hope that people will reduce and to reuse and recycle, and that hopefully one day they will stop wanting more, because that's when there will be a real change. And that means to practice contentment and to practice sense restraint, to understand the drawbacks of all these things. And if you want, I can go into a bit more of a kind of Buddhist dogma talk about that. But what I wanted to do was share with you let me know if you, oh, how am I going to get there? I've got to go behind here. Just give me a second. Open tabs. This one here. Okay, can you see? Thumbs up? Okay. So this is a series of photos that I made when we were in lockdown for COVID. And I was walking the streets every day looking for a spot to hide, actually, from the police who were going around making sure that people weren't sitting in parks. But I wanted some fresh air and exercise and to meditate in the open air, as I often do. And walking around the streets, you just see so much stuff put out onto the streets, especially at the beginning of COVID. So many things got chucked out because the many Indian immigrants in this area had to leave because they had no work and they went back to India, and whole apartment contents got spilled out into the street. And sometimes there's a kind of poetry about these discarded items, and there's a real melancholy sadness for me. And so I took these photos as a way of coming to terms with the horror of seeing this stuff. I wanted to find a little bit of beauty, just as I would find a beauty in the forest, taking a photograph of a beautiful tree or rock or sunset. I felt that I had to reconcile myself to this grim new environment, to understand this is how it is when we don't control our senses, when we can't find contentment, when we always want more. So this is the image of a little canal, a stormwater canal, where I would often go and sit and meditate, full of shopping trolleys that seem to have jumped off a bridge, perhaps despairing the state of consumerism and late capitalism, throwing themselves into this algae-filled water. But these become a home to the ibises and herons who love to sit on them and eat their fish. And there's moments of just seeing how nature is resilient, and to see the way nature just gets into those cracks. There's so much stuff left out of the street. It really is just bizarre to see. And here we have, like, I guess, like nature's taking its revenge on this little bulldozer, this earth mover. And there are moments of beauty. This is a potty, little toddler's potty covered in wisteria petals that have fallen. And, you know, here's the full scene. You know, there's this kind of tragic beauty of this discarded stuff underneath this gorgeously scented wisteria in full bloom. And I want to try to reconcile these two aspects of nature somehow in my mind, to understand this is how it is. This is the stuff that's out there in the world. And if I want it to be different, I need to talk about contentment more. I need to talk about the importance of sense restraint, the drawbacks of sensory pleasures, the drawbacks of consumerism. They don't make us happy, these sorts of things. In fact, here we have How to Be Happy in paperback, reduced to just $5 and discarded on the street. With dreams thrown away in the gutter. these things that were so valuable once to people. And like I say, we have these moments of nature coming back, little cracks in the walls where things are trying to push through, nature overtaking again. And so as I walk around the streets, I'd take these photos and I'd kind of grieve a little bit for these objects that were discarded and think about the many hands that might have touched them, the cuddles, stuffed toys might have got, and the sadness of these things no longer mattering to people anymore. Understanding that this is something that happens on a global scale that is unimaginable, the proportions of which are beyond my comprehension. And even the garbage bins are having a meltdown. And then these moments of beauty where nature has fought back a little bit. This is a plant in a drain pipe. And so anyway, so I share these images with you, and I hope that you might, this is a dead rat. For some time, my little meditation spot had a little dead rat that was also occupying the only space where the police couldn't see. Anyway, so I won't share anymore, but I share these with you as a kind of melancholic reality check about the problems that we face in the world and the scale of the issue, because it's truly disturbing. And I know that probably most of you are very committed environmentalists, and I don't want to judge anybody, but we can always do with less. And this is what the monastic path is about, this idea that, you actually don't need as many things as you thought you did. And even for householders, for lay people too, it's possible that you might not need all the things that you have. The problem, of course, is this desire for new things. Desire is also linked to ill will. This, we want things that are going to make us happy when we feel sad. And so addressing these two causes, this unhappiness that we have, the unhappiness that leads us to think, oh, if I just had this new thing, I could be happy. If I had that new car, that new phone, that new delight, or if I saw that movie or did this thing, then I'll have happiness. If we could see through that illusion, we wouldn't need all of these things. And I'm going through a process now where I'm moving on from this place. I'll be going to somewhere new. And as a monk, I always try when I travel, and certainly when I go to a new place, I start with just my bowl and my robes. That's all I take with me. And my little bag, perhaps with my laptop. And it's quite hard, to do that. It's quite hard to be that efficient. There's so many things that burden me at the moment. When I'm looking around this room, I just gave Ling some pot plants every day that she'd given us a few years ago, and I've been looking after. All these things become a burden, and they weigh heavily upon me. I feel responsible for these things now. I can't just go and throw them on the street either, not after taking all those photographs and talking to people about the trash we create in the world. But I can see through the practice of renunciation, of sense restraint, of trying to practice contentment, that none of these things actually matter. We can't hold on to them in any case. All the stuff we want to own is stuff that we can't truly own. It'll get stolen, or it'll break, or we'll have to give it up at death, or all of the things that we think we hold on to change. We change our attitude to these things. They no longer enamor us. We don't want them anymore. Our attitude to them has changed, even if they're perfectly fine. And so because we're always in this pattern of wanting, of craving, of thinking that we'll get some happiness from these objects, we accumulate these things. And then when they become too much and we realize we've run out of space, we discard them. But we don't live for long in that emptiness. We quickly fill it up again. And this is the cycle that we go through. And I know so many people who are avid environmentalists go to their homes and they're so full of stuff. And I think there's a reason for that. You know, it's part of them that they don't want to just contribute further to this global problem of waste. They want to keep things like Jan with those magazines, keep them safe, you know, until there's someone who comes forth and can take them. So I don't think the holding on is the biggest problem, although I think it is good to practice simplicity, to see what you can do without, to be as easy as possible with your belongings, to not have too many things. I think that's a good practice. But the real work is overcoming the desire for new things, the desire for, and by that I mean even secondhand new things, that desire for things to come into our lives, things that we think will make us happy. And one of the ways that we can do this is to start to look for happiness in places where perhaps we haven't been looking, such as inside, in meditation, to find the pleasure, the bliss, the happiness of meditation, of developing the mind. And in this way, we can start to see that there's a place for us that we can find happiness that isn't reliant upon these external objects which cause so much grief. And this is what the Buddha said, that our desire for objects, for sensory pleasures, for sensual experience, this is the root cause of this whole mass of suffering. This desire and craving for these things is what causes people to go out and get jobs and get sunburnt working in the fields, or to earn money, to buy stuff, to these things that you end up feeling like you have to protect and worry about losing, that you're worried that someone might steal it or your neighbors might want it, that you'll fight with your brother and sister or mother over, that you'll fight with your neighbor over. These are the things that kings will invade other countries for. And this is the cause of people stealing and getting punished. The Buddha says this is all from the Mahadukkha Khandha Sutta, which is in the Digha Nikaya number 13. And this is that great heap of suffering, the Maha, great, Dukkha, suffering, Khandha, mass, heap, this great mass of suffering that we experience in this life, and from life to life to life. This all comes from this root cause of craving. So until we've developed a mind of contentment, until we've uprooted that root cause of craving and stopped desiring things in the world, until we do that, we're never going to have any peace and contentment. And until we all do that, we're going to live in a world full of trash, full of junk. And so this is why I hope I can encourage you to practice in this way, to give up as much desire as possible, to give away craving, to uproot that defilement, and to encourage others to do the same, so that the future of the planet might be somehow different. So this is a short talk for you today about trash and coming to terms with grief. And if we want to live in symbiosis, in harmony with the planet, then we need to give up craving for stuff.
What I was thinking, Bhante, was you talked about feeling grief and grieving about the situation, and like there's a horror feeling as well, and it's quite disturbing. And so I'm just wondering about, because sometimes we talk to people and they're experiencing that kind of thing when they see all these distressing things from the environmental destruction and devastation. And sometimes they go into eco-paralysis because it's like it's too horrible and just put it aside. So I'm just wondering if you have some insights about your journey there in terms of, doesn't sound like you're going into eco-paralysis over this, but how did you come to terms with those feelings and maintain this ability to have some momentum about addressing the situation?
Yeah, I think it is quite easy to fall into paralysis or into depression. And so I'm sure you've heard this term of climate grief. There are people who are in this active process of grieving what's being lost. And it is really sad and really horrible. And, we're living in a time now where our children are growing up in a world that is fundamentally damaged. And there's a lot of grief for them. They'll never perhaps be able to walk down to the beach without seeing it strewn with plastic, or to go to a natural place and to not see it littered. And I know that in my lifetime, the amount of litter has really increased. And I know that this is just a small part of the problem, that the stuff that I see is just a part of the problem, and that the pollution and the manufacturing industries and all of the waste and all of the open cut mines, all this stuff is out there, and it's not going away. It's not getting any better. And so there is this kind of grief that is very real, and we have to honor that grief. I know there's quite a few groups who are coming together to grieve together and to be okay, to kind of acknowledge at least that this hurts and that it's okay to feel sad about this situation. Anger doesn't keep us going for long. A lot of people in the environmental protest movements especially are driven by this kind of strong desire to help the environment, but also a lot of anger and resentment. And you see what happens. People just get exhausted and burnt out really quickly, because this is a massive problem. It's so hard to do anything about it and to have an impact. And so people become very defeated. But I think for me, the thing was acceptance, some acceptance. And then whenever I can, taking the opportunity to go out and enjoy nature and to enjoy feeling the sun on my skin, to go out to the forest, to sit under a tree, to go to the beach, feel the water spray on my face and the smell of the ocean. I guess what I'm saying is to actually make sure that I experience the beauties of nature that I can. Otherwise, what's the point in fighting for it? We need to feel like it's still there for us. We need to go into those places and enjoy them, because that's why we're fighting for a better world, so that we can be connected to nature. And so I encourage all of you to actually, as often as possible, to just get out into nature. And for me, this is why I shared those images with you. For me, that was just going down literally to the stormwater drain and sitting under a tree and having just to tell myself, okay, Akaliko, this is what nature is now. You know, this is nature. And see the weeds and see the pond slime and see these dead rats, and like, this is nature. And we learn from that, you know, we learn from nature. And then, yeah, if it might be nicer to go out to more picturesque places. But I think when we do that, we kind of restore some of that stuff that's lost to grief or lost to anger. And so we have to make sure that we maintain a connection. Otherwise, you know, what's the point, you know?
Thank you so much, Tom. Thank you, Ajahn Akaliko. And thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I would like to just invite everybody, which I have put on the chats, where at Nantian Temple, we are going to plant trees and also going to clear out some weeds and pick up some rubbish that actually been sitting there for a long time. So please keep your eyes and your ears opened. That will happen in August, October, and November. Please join us. Thank you so much. Thank you. And I would like to do the closing, where normally that's what we do, to transfer merit to all the sentient beings, all the beings that sharing this beautiful, beautiful planet with us. We are not alone. Those who we cannot see with our eyes also actually exist and affected affecting by what actions we do and not do as well. Tom, when you're ready, can I please have the word? And if you would like to, you can join your hands, but otherwise you just sit and read them with me if you like. May kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity prevail all worlds. May we cherish and build affinity to benefit all beings. May chant, pure land, and precepts inspire equality and patience. May our humanity and gratitude give rise to great vows. Thank you so much, Nisha, and thank you, everybody. And I also would like to acknowledge Nantian Temple and also our Reverend Yo, who is our leading Reverend, where today she cannot be here with us because she's actually doing another chanting at Nantian Temple. I hope that you will join us again next month. Thank you so much, everybody. Bye from now.